To order this regular meeting of the Lincoln-Lancaster County Planning Commission of September 12, 2018. A printed agenda is available outside the hearing room, and a copy of the full agenda, including the staff reports, is available at the front of the chambers with the clerk. The Open Meetings Act is posted just inside the doors at the back of the room. If you parked in the parking garage across the street to the north, please be sure to pick up a parking coupon on your way out for free parking. Out of courtesy for those attending this meeting, the commissioners and the staff, cellular phone usage is not permitted in these chambers during any portion of this meeting. We will appreciate your cooperation. The Planning Commission action today is final on agenda item 4.2, special permit 18032. Any aggrieved person may appeal final action of the Planning Commission to the City Council or the County Board by filing a notice of appeal with the clerk within 14 days following the action of the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission action on all other items is a recommendation to the City Council or County Board. The first item of business is the approval of the minutes of the regular meeting held August 29th, 2018. Is there a motion?
So moved. Finnegan.
Second, Washington.
Jerry, please call the roll.
Beckius?
Yes.
Finnegan?
Yes.
Harris?
Yes.
Joy?
Yes.
Washington?
Yes.
Core?
Yes.
Shear?
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0.
The next item of business is the consent agenda. Items on the consent agenda will be called at the same time and will not be scheduled for a separate public hearing unless there is a request for someone wishing to speak or at the request of a commission member. I will ask Jerry to read all of the consent agenda items into the record. Once those items are read, she will ask if there is anyone here to speak on any of those items. If you wish to speak, we would ask that you stand and state that item. That item will then be removed from the consent agenda and scheduled as a separate public hearing under Section 3 of today's agenda. All items remaining on the consent agenda will be voted upon in total with a motion for approval. Jerry, will you please call the items on the consent agenda?
Yes, thank you. Item 1.1 is change of zone 05002B to amend the links at Lincoln Planned Unit Development to allow for the sale of alcohol for consumption on the premises as an accessory use to the golf course and clubhouse on property generally located at 375 Fletcher Avenue. Item 1.2 is change of zone 08041A to expand the existing planned unit development boundary limits by approximately 3.03 acres more or less on property generally located at the southwest corner of South 70th Street and Pine Lake Road. I would note that Commissioner Shear has declared a conflict of interest on agenda item 1.2, change of zone 08041A. Therefore, he has recused himself and will not be voting on the consent agenda. Are there any ex parte communications to be disclosed on the consent agenda items?
I don't see any. I would enter.
Is there anyone here? Excuse me.
Sorry.
Is there anyone here wishing to speak on any of these consent agenda items? If so, please stand and state that item.
Looks like we're good, Jerry.
Okay.
I would entertain a motion.
Move approval, Beckius.
Second, Joy.
Jerry?
Beckius?
Yes.
Finnegan?
Yes.
Harris?
Yes.
Joy?
Yes.
Washington?
Yes.
Core?
Yes.
Motion carried 6-0.
There are no requests for deferral, so we will now proceed to public hearings. The staff will make a brief presentation. The applicant will then be requested to present his or her testimony, followed by those who wish to testify in support, followed by those who wish to testify in opposition. If, during your testimony, you have copies of documents or materials you would like distributed to the Planning Commission members and or included as part of the record, please provide that information to Jerry for distribution. The staff will then be given an opportunity to respond to the testimony, and then the applicant should have an opportunity for rebuttal. Each person testifying should state their name and address and shall have 5 minutes to speak unless additional time is requested and granted. The timer will go off after 4 minutes, then you will have 1 minute to wrap up your testimony. The Planning Commission will vote immediately at the close of the public hearing unless the Commission votes to defer action or continue the public hearing. Jerry, please call the first public hearing item.
Okay. Item 4.1 is County Text Amendment 18008 to amend Article 2, Section 2.002 by adding a definition for accessory dwelling unit Article 4, Section 4.007, to list accessory dwelling unit as a special permit. And Article 13 by adding Section 13.049 of the Lancaster County zoning regulations to allow accessory dwelling units by special permit in the AG zoning district. Staff recommendation is for approval. Are there any ex parte communications to be disclosed?
I see none.
Tom Chaka, planning staff. This application is to amend the county zoning regulations to allow accessory dwelling units in the AG district. And it would only be for the AG district. From here on out, I'm going to refer to accessory dwelling units as ADUs. An ADU is a self-contained dwelling on the same lot as a principal dwelling. The ADUs can be attached to the principal dwelling or be a detached standalone building. The ADU typically contains its kitchen, bathroom, 1 or 2 bedrooms, and a living area, and is subordinate to the main principal dwelling. When planning department was directed by the county board to look at this, we formed a working group of 7 members with varied interest. Christy Joy being one of those, thank you. And during May and June of this year, we had 5 meetings with the working group and concluded on July 25th with a public meeting that was open to anybody from the public who wanted to attend. We had 10 members from the public attend, and 6 of the 7 members of the working group were in attendance. The working group also helped to develop a purpose and intent statement to help them come up with the conditions for the special permit. And I'll just read what those were. Purpose and intent was to allow persons with special needs to live semi-independently but within close proximity to family or caregiver, provide a variety of housing types and choices for different age groups and economic conditions, ensure that an ADU remains clearly subordinate and permanently associated to the existing principal dwelling, protect the rural character of Lancaster County, and minimize impacts on adjacent properties, infrastructure, and the general public. Based on that purpose and intent statement, we came up with conditions that would be in the special permit that you would have to abide by. So everybody can read that. Just going through these one at a time. The first one, the lot area shall be 20 acres or larger. And similar to what the AG zoning has today, when we speak 20 acres, it doesn't have to be net. You can count to the center line of section line roads. The total square footage of the ADU shall not exceed the lesser of 800 square feet or 40% of the principal dwelling, excluding garages and carports. See, no more than 2 bedrooms are allowed in the ADU. The owner would be required to live on the property either in the principal dwelling or the ADU. The owner shall also file a deed against the property stating that the ADU cannot be sold separately from the main house. The ADU must share the same access point to the public or private street as the principal dwelling. ADU must meet the same setbacks as the principal dwelling. The height also needs to meet the height of the district, but it cannot be higher than the principal dwelling. If it's a detached ADU, it shall be located a distance of no greater than 200 feet from the principal dwelling and must not be closer to the street right of way than the principal dwelling. And lastly, the ADU must share utilities with the principal dwelling unless there can demonstrate a practical problem with sharing due to topography or other unique site considerations. Difference mainly being here between this and the city is the city's on public water and sanitary sewer. We're in the county. You're going to be on a well and a septic tank, and sometimes the location of that septic or lagoon may not work out for the ADU. All of the conditions above could be waived by the county board except for the owner occupancy requirement and the shared drive access. The county engineer's department was pretty specific on wanting that condition in because they didn't want to have additional culverts and access points to maintain out in the county. The special permit would be final action at Planning Commission unless waivers were asked for. Then it would need to go to the county board. Saying this would add a new special permit to the special permit chapter of the county zoning regulations. There would also be a definition added. And in Article 4, the AG district, it would just be added as another special permit. I guess take any questions.
Questions? Yes, Chris.
Under the all above conditions, I think we needed to do that as D and E. So if we could just change that for our motion.
That's in the staff report.
That's in the report.
Oh, in the
There's
report,
an
okay.
attachment. This is,
So do the attachment, we're okay?
yeah,
Okay,
what I have
perfect.
up here would be what
I
would
saw
be-
that too, Christie.
Okay, just,
And
I didn't know if that
so
had to be
I-
changed
yeah.
from our stuff.
I checked the, like what's actually gonna go in the code, and it does reference the right thing, but in the staff report, it
Oh, I see.
has F instead of E.
Yeah, just a
Yeah.
typo there. So we don't have to do anything then about that then?
I don't think
Okay,
so.
perfect, thanks.
This
Good.
is what would be sent to the county attorney.
Excellent, good.
Other questions, Maya?
So I have some, and Tom already knows what's coming because we've already talked.
Can I remember what I said to you?
Yeah, so, but, no, you can all enjoy the questions as well. So, in the briefing that we had on this, you talked about that the working group discussed whether to make this conditional use or a special permit. Could you talk a little bit to why you settled on the special permit?
It was the kind of the consensus of the group that since this was a new special permit, or a new thing, ADUs, that we thought, at least at the beginning, this should have a review process. See how adjacent property owners will react to it. Is there going to be a lot of opposition, or are they going to go through fairly easy? And we've had special permits in the past in both city zoning and county zoning where they were special permits, and then later the text was amended to allow those by conditional use if you've had several of them go through with no problems and they've all been approved. So it's something we thought at the beginning should be through a public hearing process, maybe a year or two down the road. If there's been no issues with them, we could think about at that time amending the zoning code and making it a conditional use.
And then, you decided to go with the sort of creating the hoop to jump through by having the public hearing and the special permit and the sort of public process. But then, this proposed language adds the added review of only the county board being able to grant waivers. And I asked you what other examples are there where the county board has to grant waivers, and you said there, out of 40 special permits in the county, there are only 2, commercial composting and racetracks. What is it about an ADU, most likely is a private citizen making the most of their land? What is it that makes it rise to that level?
I think going back again to that, this is something new, and we felt these were conditions established by the working group, and several of these are pretty common in other jurisdictions, such as the owner living on site, the shared utilities, the shared access. The square footage or the size of the ADU varies. I've seen them smaller, I've seen them larger. So we just felt, or the working group and planning felt that, well, if you meet these conditions, fine, you can get approved. But if you're asking for something above and beyond, then it should have another level of review process. And like I said earlier, we don't know how these are going to go, the first ones. We don't know if neighbors are going to be objecting to them. Somebody saying, I thought there was only going to be one house here, and now I'm going to have more houses, and who's going to live in it, and other factors. If you're going from 800 square feet where you can kind of, theorize that at that size of a house, you're probably not going to have more than 1 or 2 people living in it, most likely. If I go to 1,200 square feet and I've got 4 bedrooms, well, now I got a family there. That has a different impact, more people, more traffic. So it was just the conclusion that this is something new, and if they wanted something more than what's adopted, then it should have to go to the county board.
But is it possible that some of these waivers that would be asked for would just be, more of a technicality, where the lot is just the reason they can't be compliant is because of something that is not outlandish and something that planning would recommend approval of, and that is really a non-event?
It's certainly up to this board to if they think that all waivers could be final action with planning commission, that's something certainly you could do. Of course, the county board would have to agree to that, because this does have to go to the county board for final approval. But I guess I don't have a further argument than what I've said for why it should go to the county board.
Right, thank you.
Tom, can you speak to a little bit, at the beginning you said this applies only to AG. Can you explain why AGR is not included in this proposal?
Originally, when we did this, we kind of looked at what the city had done at that time. And the city ADU text says you have to have the same lot area as a duplex. They were very strong on not increasing density in the area. Well, so we discussed that a little bit, and we felt like, well, if we don't want to increase density in the county, we would have to have a minimum lot size of 40 acres. We thought that was a little bit too much. So we are, there is the potential to increase density here in the county. And if we went to AGR or just say a minimum lot size of 3 acres, we would be opening the door for a huge potential, pretty large increase in density out in the county.
Thank you.
I have a follow-up question to the density. I'm curious what you think. if you, because of the unique nature of ADUs, they're not their own standalone, unit, that whether the impact of the density can be considered the same when, as a freestanding unit, when, we heard, and now I'm referring back to the briefing that we had prior to this hearing, but, in a lot of the scenarios, this may be an elderly parent that already was living in the house that will be living in the ADU, or a grown child that was already living in the basement, or is a pool house and it's recreational use, or it's a guest house and these people are just coming to visit. I mean, of course, there could be, and probably will be and should be, circumstances where maybe you're renting it out and you're truly bringing in another person or family or what have you with their car and all that stuff, but isn't it more likely that the people who will be enjoying the ADU are already there to begin with?
I don't think I can say that. We don't know who's going to be living in these ADUs. Some people might want to build them just for extra income and they'll rent it out to anybody. Certainly there will be situations where it could be a family member there, but I don't think I can make the statement that we think most of them would be a family member. It's just an unknown.
But looking at national trends of aging in place and, kids staying at home longer, or is there no data that shows that ADUs
I didn't go to
these
that
people?
type of in-depth analysis.
Steve Hendrickson at the Planning Department. I think you also need to keep in mind that this ADU stays there permanently through the special permit. And so I think that's one of the main factors is that over time, the first person, it may be a relative, but the second owner, it may be a renter, and the third person may be a relative, but the fourth owner, then a renter. And so I think that's what we need to take into account. Certainly by having a size restriction of 800 square feet and 2 bedrooms, you're probably keeping it to 2 people or 3 people. So whether it's a renter or not, from that standpoint, it's probably not as much as if you allowed it to be 1,000 or 1,200 square foot house with a basement. And now you're more than likely looking into 4 or 5 people and 3 or 4 cars in that circumstance. So the size certainly helps with not increasing the density. I was also going to add on the AGR part of it. That wasn't the charge either on the city side or from the county board to look at AGR. Here we were very much always considering the 20-acre lot, lots of setbacks, lots of open space, a very different setback. When you're in AGR subdivisions, the houses aren't as close to each other as they are in the city, certainly, but it's a different circumstance in terms of what people's expectations are. There's certainly a little more room to put one on, but now suddenly it's much closer to your neighbors, the setbacks are different, and so we really didn't look at the AGR part of it. But yes, this is definitely different than the city, where the city there's no increase in density. Here, there'll be an additional dwelling unit, though, because of the size restriction, it will be smaller.
Other questions? Okay, thanks, Tom. The applicant is the city, so we will go to testimony and support.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Planning Commission, I'm Mark Hunziker. I'm appearing on behalf of the Home Builders Association of Lincoln, and I have a few suggestions as to how this might be improved. Thank you. Going through the order of the special permit, back to the, first of all, to the AGR question. If somebody develops a subdivision in the AGR district, which is about the only way you can get to a 3-acre lot size, if they don't want to have ADUs in their subdivision, they can cover that with restrictive covenants very easily, and most of them would. But be that as it may, you can't make that change today because it wasn't advertised that way, so I'll pass on that. First of all, 20 acres is too big. 20 acres is the minimum lot size out in the county for standalone homes. There are a number of them out there that were built on pre-existing lots where people would like to do ADUs. I don't think there's a great demand for these. I don't think you're going to substantially increase the density in the county just because you have ADUs. But I think that it ought to be available to, excuse me, smaller lots, given the other restrictions that are already going to be in place. So we would suggest that 20 go down to 3. Secondly, 800 square feet is too small. The average apartments that are being built now that are 2-bedroom are more like 1,200 square feet. I've personally lived in an 800 square foot dwelling one of the summers while I was in law school. And my wife and I were bumping into each other all over the place in what was a trailer park, essentially. It was a 14-foot wide trailer. That's the kind of house you're talking about. We would like you to see that go to 1,200 square feet, and there are a number of reasons why. I mean, I've had several different clients who've inquired about this. One was a couple who I helped buy a 20-acre parcel 30 years ago. They went out and built a nice house on it. They've lived there a long time. They wanted to let their kids move into it, and they wanted to move to a secondary residence that was at least large enough for them to feel comfortable after living that long in a large house, and large enough to have the kids over, grandkids over, for the weekend and spend the night. If you know what that's like with small grandchildren, there are toys everywhere when they come along, and having enough room to do that comfortably is important. 2 bedrooms is fine. Number 4, the deed requirement is, at least in my opinion, improper terminology. I'm suggesting to you that prior to an issuance of a building permit, the owner have to file a restrictive covenant against the property. A deed is simply not the proper instrument to impose these kinds of restrictions. And if the city or if the county wants to have the county attorney approve the form, he should draft a form. It's a half-page form. It doesn't take any time. If he needs help, I'll do it for him. But it's something that you shouldn't have to go each time and get approved by the county attorney. One access is fine. Height limits are height limits. Leave it alone. If the primary dwelling on the property, the initial dwelling, doesn't exceed the height limit or doesn't get to the height limit, why not allow the accessory unit to get to the same height limit? It's going to be at least as far, probably further, away from the road. It won't harm anyone. The 200-foot limit in paragraph 7 of this is not necessary. And the distance between these 2 dwelling units will primarily be addressed by topography, the distance to travel to build sewer laterals and well lines. And if you can't meet those things because of one of those things, you'll have to come in and ask for a waiver every single time. People are not going to build roads to a secondary dwelling unit if they can avoid it. It's expensive. Even a gravel road costs a lot of money to go in and build something that's adequate. So I don't think you're going to see people trying to exceed this if they can avoid it. But if they need to, there's no reason for you to have a condition that imposes that. Sharing utilities is one of the big factors that will keep these things joined at the hip for all time. Getting a new electric service, or drilling a new well, or getting a new septic system approved, all involve government action that will draw attention to that and require that they not do it without getting an exception to this. So, again, I think these things are obviously going to be subordinate, and there aren't going to be that many of them. I think you ought to lighten up a little bit on these conditions. You will have a special permit that gets filed with each and every one of these, filed against the land, runs with the land. I don't even think you really need the covenant, but we said, okay, if you want one, fine. Because it will be of record, it will show up in any title search, and anybody who wants to try to buy one of those units separately from the main house will find out that they aren't going to be able to get a loan because the title commitment's going to come back and say, hey, the special permit says you can't do this, and we're not going to make a loan on it. So in any case, I think that these changes would make this a lot easier to administer and a lot less time for both you and the county board dealing with exceptions to these things, which are almost inevitably going to be requested in every case.
I'm not sure I understand 4. You said that a deed is not the proper instrument. Why not?
A deed is an instrument which is used to convey an interest in real estate. It's what you get when you buy your house. It's not the same as imposing a restrictive covenant, which also runs with the land, but also is not a conveyance of an interest in the property.
Other questions? Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Other testimony in support? Is there testimony in opposition? Do we have staff questions?
Yes.
Yes. I had to ask, though.
Can we just go through
Sure.
the proposed?
We can do questions, rebuttal, all in one.
Yeah, we can.
Find my notes.
We have extra up here,
Tom,
too.
do you have a
Tom,
copy of this?
Yeah, of
of the
No.
amendment?
Mark's motion.
Thank you. Okay. Number 1, decreasing the lot area from 20 to 3 acres. We would not support that. Once again, if you going back to one of the main purpose and intent from the working group as well as in the comprehensive plan is to preserve the rural character of the county. We also think it's very important to keep the density as close to 1 house per 20 acres as possible. Our charge was to look at accessory dwelling units from the county board, that they had some interest in this. It wasn't to find a way to have a second house on 20 acres to get around. There are a few exceptions to the 20 acres I think Mark alluded to. There's the Farmstead Split, where I'll just briefly review that for you. So if you have an existing house that's part of a farm and it's been there for at least 5 years, that house can be put on 1 acre as long as there's 20 acres left over. The new house would have to be built on 20 acres. There's the ag preservation that allows you to create a lot down to 3 acres, but you have to have 20 acres to start with, and 75% of that 20 acres has to remain as an unbuildable open space area. The density is still 1 house per 20 acres. It's just allowing you to create a smaller lot. The third option would be through a community unit plan. Community unit plan is still based on the density of 1 lot for 20 acres with a 25% bonus for preserving open space. So if you had 100 acres, and also you have to have 75 acres to even do a community unit plan. So if you had 100 acres, you divide by 5, that's 4, and then you get a 25% bonus. So for clustering lots and preserving a more larger open space area, they allow a density bonus that usually works out to 1 additional lots than just dividing it up into a bunch of 20-acre lots. So those are the ways. Really, the Farmstead Split's the only one that would give you, more than, potentially you could have 2 houses on 21 acres. So we feel that the 20 acres is important. It maintains the purpose of the AG district while allowing for accessory dwelling units. Total square footage, to increase that, we feel that 800 square feet also meets the intent and purpose of an ADU. Like I said, if you look to other communities, I've seen one community that was 600 square feet. I did see another one that was 1,000 square feet. So most of them are 1,000 square feet or less. We also, so again, it's following the intent of what an ADU is supposed to be, a subordinate building to the principal dwelling, not another dwelling that's the same size as a principal dwelling for a second house. 2 bedrooms. Okay.
Before you go on to the next one, Tom, the city version of this, it was also limited to 800 square feet, is that right?
Yes, it was. Okay, number 3, 2 bedrooms, that was fine. Number 4, the owner shall file, okay. We, in general, agree with number 4, except I would change it to say, owner shall file a deed restriction against the property.
Can you explain that? I don't understand what that means.
Yeah, I guess I didn't quite have my terminology correct. It wouldn't be a separate deed. It would just be something on file that restricts the owner from selling off the ADU separately, and it's on file at registered deed, so any potential buyer would know that they can't sell that off separately. And we would, I think the city has the same condition, and we could draft like a boilerplate for that.
A question for clarification on the city's ADU. Does it say deed restriction or what does it say?
Yes, it's deed restriction. This
Okay.
was a typo on our part. It should have said deed restriction in all 3 places.
Thank you.
But you are describing essentially the same kind of instrument that Mark was talking about. You just have maybe different terminology. Okay.
But you don't see the need for the prior to issuance of a building permit?
I think that's already in there.
Since this is under...
That's your language? That's the proposed language? Or is that the...
That's...
Has to be filed prior
This
to any
sheet?
building permit.
This is Mark's language.
Yeah.
He just moved it to the front of the sentence instead of at the end.
Okay, so it's the same language? Okay, all right.
Almost. I think that what Mark presented reordered the second paragraph of point 4.
I guess I'm proposing that we stick with number 4 as staff has proposed, except add the word restriction after deed.
Okay.
Let's see, 5, no changes. 6, on the height, again, I think it goes back to what the intent and purpose of an ADU is, and it's to be subordinate to the principal dwelling. And that's why we felt that the ADU should not be taller and more prominent than the principal dwelling. Seven, the distance of no greater than 200 feet from the principal dwelling. again, I think that goes back again to the intent of the ADU, and that it shouldn't be, way off on another portion of the property and look like basically a second dwelling on 20 acres, the intent of an ADU is to be relatively close to the principal dwelling.
Follow-up to that, and going back to what Mr. Hunsaker said, wouldn't that be restricted though by the utilities? That you couldn't necessarily go off too far if you're sharing utilities with the main house?
If you're sharing it, or you would have a good argument, if I'm thousands of feet away from the principal house, how could I possibly share the utilities? So then it would be a new septic tank and well for the ADU.
And then we did have a lot of discussion about the concept of maybe it would be cost prohibitive to do a new septic and well, and therefore it could be waived as one of the waiver agreements. And so if that was the case and you didn't have a restriction on the distance, the committee hashed a lot about that, of keeping it an accessory dwelling unit.
Going back to Maya's original comments about why does it not a conditional use versus a special permit? My guess is if you're going to see people coming forward for waivers of any kind and going before the county board, it's going to be height and square footage. Is that your thought, Maya?
No, not.
Okay.
I think it could be a lot of them, including the 200 from the house. And I think,
and that one too.
Yeah, I mean, there are some things that are not technicalities, like I want to build a monstrosity, right? But in the likely scenario, this is just a person that can't comply with the conditions.
That's right.
For some reason.
And I would agree with that, 200 feet.
Yeah.
Tom, can you tell me, the working group, was the Home Builders Association represented on that?
Had, I think he's, well, we didn't have, I don't think we had an official from the Home Builders Association. We did have a realtor builder, Dan Klein. I think he is a member of Home Builders Association. I did reach out to the Home Builders Association and asked if, that they wanted me to come out and discuss it on an, but the agenda they had, their last meeting was full, so they couldn't get me on it. So they said they, and then I think their next meeting is after this hearing, so it didn't work out that I was able to go out there and give them a presentation.
So you're opposed to everything except number 4, and opposed to all the amendments proposed,
yes,
except for number 4, adding the word restriction after
right. I was just gonna say number, but not the way it's written in Mr. Hunsaker's proposal.
So sticking with planning's original language, inserting the word restriction after the word deed.
Correct.
Okay.
Other questions? Okay, I think you did do rebuttal at the same time, don't you think?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't want to lead you, but, okay. So I think we have gone through the hearing process. I think we're ready to entertain a motion and discuss.
Move approval.
Second, Core.
Discussion?
So I'm going to move approval, and I'm going to support the motion regardless of what happens, but I am going to offer an amendment, potentially 2, but I think I'll start with the first, and I think this.
I'm going to stop you for just a second. So when you're moving approval, are you including the amendment with the restriction word in there or not?
Yeah.
Okay.
So planning's language moving
Okay.
approval of plannings, I mean, with the addition of the word restriction and to number 4.
Okay.
First of all, I'm a proponent of ADUs, particularly in an urban setting where they can add to the affordable housing stock. But I think they're a great idea in the county as well, and I think there's a nationwide and global trend of personalizing your living space and you know, allowing you and your family to stay there as long as possible. So I'm all for that. I am going to offer the amendment to allow Planning Commission to grant waivers. Because in my mind, that makes, obviously there's some in those proposed language we got from Mr. Hunziker that's more permissive. But I think what I object to in, the only thing I object to in planning's proposed language is that extra red tape that creates. And I think we have already created a hoop for people to jump through, and we have already created a public process where neighbors can come and object and be heard. There was talk about making this a conditional use, and there's still talk about making this a conditional use if it works out. So I think we are already being conservative, and we're treading lightly, and we have already, we're not even approved anything, we've already been criticized for being too restrictive, right? So I think it's most likely that somebody who wants to do this is a good neighbor who just wants to enjoy their land, and there's something about their lot that does not allow them to be in compliance. And then I think that planning will recommend approval of that waiver, and we will approve it, and then we can be done with it, instead of making this person, most likely a well-meaning person, go on to a second round of bureaucracy and red tape. That's not helping the person it's intended to help. It is protecting against somebody who might have some outlandish motive, but I don't think that's the likely scenario, and I want to plan for the likely scenario. And you know, there's always the appeal process, so you know, there's always the opportunity for more review, but I just don't think it's necessary. And that way, if we do need to adjust waivers and conditions as we learn about what is actually wanted, we don't need to slow people down when they just want to do something good for themselves on their land.
Okay, so Maya has moved an amendment. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, we have discussion now on the amendment.
I'm a little, if someone is requesting waivers, Planning Commission can approve or deny them. It's just adding that second level of, I think Maya's trying to say bureaucracy, but I think at this point, that's pretty much how we're doing it for the city, and so I would support following that for the county as well until we get a handle on what these applications are going to be like.
Other discussion?
I think that Maya has offered a great compromise here. You know, the ADU is my son's biggest nightmare. You know, he thinks I'm going to move in with him. But I think there's going to be, I think there's going to be a need for this, and I agree that sometimes we slow down everything by just being extra cautious. I think this is being cautious, but also having the ability for Planning Commission to make a decision. So I would support Maya's, so I will support Maya's amendment.
I would as well. I think that the issues that we're discussing here, I think are issues that should be able to be easily tackled and conquered by the Planning Commission. If the county board wants to spend their time on these issues, I guess we'll see if they want to. They surely can, but I think that the issues presented here fall well under the purview of the Planning Commission, and I would like to think that we can knock it out ourselves.
Others?
I think we've shown that we're able to manage waivers and other processes. I don't think this is a stretch.
Anybody else?
There was a lot of discussion committee-wise, and it really came down to the fact that the city had also put that extra burden on that until we knew what was going on. So the big issue was, or at least from my perspective, because I was way more lenient on that side, again, lenient, wanting conditional versus special, all of those types of things because of the good neighbor and the board. And so it was really came down to seeing how it went and then coming back and revising it. So listening to all this, it's really challenging because it's still going to go to the county board. So if they want to have the oversight, they can overrule this motion and say, no, we're going to put that second step in there. So I'm still wrestling with which way I'm going on that.
Do we have input from staff?
It looks like it.
Just simply a wording to make sure we have one thing clear. I would recommend that if from the motion it should say in that last part it says the county board, so strike out the word county board and insert the word planning commission.
Yes.
So the planning commission may adjust conditions 4 and 5, period. And then a new sentence that would say conditions 4 and 5 may not be adjusted by the county board. Because I don't want to lose part of this idea too was even the county board can't adjust 4 and 5. If you don't add that sentence, then it makes it that the planning commission can adjust anything except 4 and 5, but then it doesn't say anything about what the county board. So that would be just one wording which I think met the intent of your
I'm
your
fine
item.
with that.
Good with that?
Yeah.
Steve, would you read that last,
Sure.
the last sentence?
So it would be the strikeout county board, the planning commission may adjust conditions except for 4 and 5, period. So the rest of it stays the same. But the new sentence would be conditions 4 and 5 may not be adjusted by the county board.
Is a second okay with that? Whoever, I know there are two.
It was,
Okay, good.
Okay.
Okay. Any other discussion?
One last thing is when it does go to the county board, it'd be really nice if they could think about adding the AGR because there's a lot of site comments on the number 1 when we looked at it from a committee. There were a whole bunch of lots, or not a whole bunch, but there were lots that were not meeting the standards that would require waivers. So as a commission, as a planning commission, I'd like us to ask them to look at adding AGR also.
Can that
So-
be a separate resolution?
Yeah,
Yeah.
let's make that separate.
Yep.
Vote on this amendment.
We'll do
Do
this
we
and then
have
go
to
to
make
that.
a separate resolution? I mean,
think
don't
we
they just
do.
look
Yeah,
at the
just put it in
minutes?
the minutes.
I mean, it's just on the record.
Okay,
Good point.
thank you.
last time, but
I just,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, it'd be good if we could just do minutes.
I just want to say again, I'm really, I'm not against saving a step for the applicant or for the county board, but I'm just worried the effect that if we waive it for this one, what effect is that going to have on our city version? And I think it's really important to have that subsequent oversight at the beginning, especially because I know that neighborhoods fought so hard for that in the city version. And let's just put it this way, I'm pretty sure that if they knew it was going on in the county, they would be here and speaking, that they wouldn't approve that.
Okay. Are we ready to vote?
Okay, this is on the amendment to allow the planning commission to grant waivers. Okay, Beckius,
Yes.
Finnegan,
yes.
Harris,
Yes.
or Joy,
No.
Washington.
Yes.
Core,
No.
Shear.
Yes.
Motion carried 5-2.
Okay, now we will go to the original motion.
As amended, adding
Yes.
the
yes.
word restriction to, or following the word deed under item number 4 in the 3 areas where deed is referenced.
Correct.
Okay? So this is a motion to approve as amended.
Just before we do that, anybody want to say anything else before we vote?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, go for it.
Sorry. When we have the working groups, I think staff does a good job of trying to get people that represent each interested party. Kind of like when we sit up here, we all kind of represent different aspects of the county and the city. I'm a little unclear of whether the person that staff thought they had on was from the Home Builders Associated, knew that they were representing the Home Builders Association or not. But I think it's a little, as far as Mr. Hunsaker's amendment, I'm glad that we're really not doing much with that, because I think it's inappropriate for the special interest group to then come forward and say, well, this working group who has made up this diverse people, this group, voted on this, but hey, I'm more special than they are, so I'm coming to the hearing and I want this done. I feel like they've already had their input on the committee, and if they feel that they weren't involved, then they need to let us know so that we can rectify that in the future.
Good. I want to say something too. I actually appreciated Mark's suggestions. I think actually I was tracking with them really well and thought that they were appropriate to bring up. But I will say, just kind of reinforcing what Tracy's saying, this is a long process when we do one of these, and there's lots of meetings and there's lots of input, and to be able to understand sort of the overall vision and intent with this, as we talked about what an ADU really is and what that should mean in the county, that brought me back anyway to understanding that these are good suggestions but don't fit. So I think this is been a good process, and obviously I'm going to support the motion.
Okay, and just
go ahead.
I'm just going to step in and disagree respectfully, but I don't think it's ever too late to come with any amendments, any point of view. So as far as I'm concerned, just till the very end, keep coming with the suggestions.
Good point. That's a good point.
Yeah, I will concur with that as well. I don't know who was invited to these opportunities and what have you. Not just this particular opportunity, but opportunities in general. I think the hearing process is the opportunity for any special interest group, whether it's an association of tradespeople or a neighborhood association or what have you, to come and speak their mind. That's part of the process. That's okay. It never bothers me. I think it's fine. I didn't participate. I was absent when this board passed the ADUs for the city, which met with a lot of resistance from groups that did not want to add density to their areas. I think that if we are looking at the waivers of conditions potentially coming and being the sole responsibility of this board, should the county board approve that, I, for one, will say I'm not necessarily tied to any of these conditions, and we'll look at the potential of waiver for all of them if given the correct site, if given the correct building, so on and so forth. So while I think these are great conditions, we have a comprehensive plan that says we want to add density in certain areas, but then those areas don't necessarily want to add density. So we run against these things all the time, but I'm okay with moving forward with this, knowing that I'm okay with looking at something between 20 and 3 acres in size, and making that evaluation on an individual basis. I'm fine with that. That doesn't bother me as a commissioner. I think it's my job, and so I'm fine with moving forward without including any of these, knowing that I'm willing to sit here and listen to amendments as they come forward, and to permits that waive conditions as they come forward. I don't want this to be a make it or break it situation, and I'm glad that it's not.
So now I'm left with my comments I think were maybe misinterpreted. I'm not saying don't come testify, but I'm just saying that during those working groups, sometimes compromises are made. So, and we don't necessarily know what those compromises were unless we were sitting on that group. And so I think it's really important that when we have put together a group like that, that we kind of go with their recommendations, because I'm sure it was well thought out and compromises were made, and we need to respect those.
Okay, ready to vote?
Okay.
Let's vote.
This is recommendation of approval as amended on County Text Amendment 18008. Beckius?
Yes.
Finnegan?
Yes.
Harris?
Yes.
Joy?
Yes.
Washington?
Yes.
Core?
Yes.
Shear?
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0. Okay, moving on. Agenda item 4.2 is special permit 18032 to allow for the development of a community unit plan to include 6 single-family dwelling units with requested waivers on property generally located at 5405 Ruth Street. Staff recommendation is for conditional approval. Again, this is final action on this item unless appealed to the City Council within 14 days of today's action. Are there any ex parte communications to be disclosed?
Yes, I have one, Jerry. It's Tracy.
Okay.
Core. Russ Meyer called me before I knew this was coming up. He just asked me how to proceed in respect to neighborhoods and communication, and I just told him that to reach out the sooner the better and to share as much information as possible.
Okay, thank you.
George?
Thank you, George Wesselhoff, Planning Department. So the location in question is on the south side of Ruth Street, near the intersection of 54th. Antelope Creek is to the south, Van Dorn Street. 56th Street is just off the map to the right or to the east. And so the proposal is to develop 6 single-family dwelling units consisting of both single-family attached and single-family detached units on approximately 1.15 acres. The development will include a 22-foot wide private driveway as part of a 26-foot wide public access and utility easement. So there'll be 6 lots, and they will be centered on the private drive that will come south off Ruth Street. There will also be an outlot B, on the south side of the development. They are providing 6 visitor stalls that will be centered in the community unit plan that will provide parking in addition to the required parking for the dwelling units. And so the community unit plan in the R2 district allows 6 dwelling units based on 5.8 dwelling units per acre. And so it should be noted that there was a subdivision to the west that where they subdivided the property. I'll just show the existing conditions map here. So there was a subdivision to the west recently, a few years ago, where they subdivided 4 lots for single-family attached. There was 1 residential dwelling that was not included, but those 5 existing dwellings are on 1 acre approximately of area. The proposed site again is 1.15, so the property owner in question could by right develop 5 dwelling units on this property without a special permit or public hearing. The outlot that I mentioned on the south side of the development, outlot B, is for open space. I believe it's just over 12,000 square feet that is associated with the floodplain to the south, and no development will occur in this outlot. This part of this outlot was recently conveyed or included in a subdivision that was approved. The ownership was Christ Place Church to the east, and so this outlot includes part of their land that increased the area to the 1.15 acres. And so the applicant is requesting 8 waivers as part of this community unit plan. 2 of those are subdivision waivers. which include lot adjustments to reduce the lot depth from 90 feet, the minimum lot depth from 90 feet to 60 feet on all 6 lots, to allow the lots without public street frontage. 3 of the waiver requests are zoning ordinance waivers, including a reduction of the 2-family dwelling lot area from 5,000 square feet to 3,300 square feet on lots 2 through 5. Also, a waiver to allow internal setbacks of 0 feet on all 6 lots. And finally, to allow a minimum lot width per family for 2-family dwelling lot width of 34 feet. There are 3 design standard waivers, including a waiver from the stormwater detention facilities, which this waiver has been reviewed by the Public Works Watershed Management and is justified based on the fact that there's not going to be a significant increase in the flow. Also, water quality is not required as part of the land disturbed is less than 1 acre. Now, one of the other agencies that reviewed for this aspect was the Lower Platte South Natural Resource District, the NRD, and they did have a concern about potential erosion of the creek bank of Antelope Creek. And so in order to support this waiver, the city and the Lower Platte NRD are requesting that the applicant show how erosion or potential erosion of the creek will be mitigated. Finally, the last 2 design standard waivers include a waiver from the requirement for abutting sanitary sewer for 2 of the lots from 20 feet to 10 feet. The applicant had initially requested a reduction to 6 feet, and in working with Public Works and Utilities, the proposal that staff would recommend is 10 feet, which would allow sufficient space without unnecessary pipe installation. Then there was a design standard waiver pertaining to the orientation of the structures facing Roos Street, and I'll just supply a graphic here that was provided to the Urban Design Committee that shows how the dwelling units, the attached and detached, will be centered on the private drive. So there was a waiver that was discussed from the design standards as far as orientation from Roos Street. And so the developer did hold an informational meeting on August 14th with the surrounding neighbors. And one of their big concerns was density. They also had questions about infrastructure, drainage, building setbacks, and the proposed homeowners association and covenants. So with that, I can answer any questions you may have.
Questions for George?
Was there any staff present at that meeting, that neighborhood meeting?
Yes, I was there.
Okay. I can't remember for sure. When a house is on a corner lot, how do we approach, like the front and the side yard? I know that there's, I'm just unclear about how that goes.
Sure, no, that's a fair question. Actually, we have to keep in mind that the access drive will be private, so it will not be a public street or a private street. And so their front yard, their 25-foot minimum front yard, will just face Roos Street.
I'm just looking for comparison purposes, so not necessarily this project. I mean, like if it's anywhere else in the city and it's on a corner lot, what do we require them to do?
Okay, sure. If it's a corner lot on a street, then they would have 2 front yards by definition, facing both streets.
And so they would have to show, an entrance on both sides, on both front yards, no?
An entrance to the unit?
Yeah.
No, they just have the setbacks, right? They have the same setback.
Right, they would have the same setbacks. It would be up to the builder or the applicant to determine their house layout. I mean, they would have to, if they were in a neighborhood design standards area, they would have to meet those standards, but otherwise they could determine their orientation.
Okay.
I have a similar question. about the corner setback. So if you're public street to public street, your corner lot must have a 25-foot setback on each of your, quote, fronts. But if it's a private drive, what's the requirement?
So what we look at is for this, the overall setbacks pertain to the overall site. They are showing, one of the criteria is that we have a 22-foot setback from the front of the garages to the sidewalk so the vehicles don't block the sidewalk. And that's what's provided for in this proposal. I don't know if that answers your...
So is that going to be, because the garages face the private street on this, so is that 22 feet to the, I don't know how to word this without, is it 22 feet here, or is it 22 feet here?
It's facing the private street, what you pointed to first.
Okay.
Or private drive, excuse me.
Tondra, does that answer your question?
It does, but I'm thinking about the letters that we got and the concern with the side yards, that in this neighborhood, that most of the houses don't face private drives internally, so they all face north or south. So it feels like, oh, I'm in a neighborhood, I'm driving down the street, all the houses have the same layout, so they're all facing. In this one, the houses will face the internal private drive. In the neighborhood meeting, that was not the neighborhood meeting, but the design meeting, that group met, and there was a question about the size of the porches, and they asked each other, you know, are those 8-foot porches? And I think there was an assumption that they were. When I looked at the plans, they looked like 6-foot porches, not 8. And so at that point, it doesn't look like a porch that's really used. It looks like a porch that's decorative. So I'm wondering what the appearance is in the existing neighborhood when you drive past this new subdevelopment.
I might defer to the applicant as far as their exact building plans. I would offer a somewhat comparable development. It was a special permit, not for a CUP, but for historic preservation, which was Cordner Court, that was approved recently. And that was, I believe it was 8 residential units on a private drive, somewhat similar to this, where it was on an outlot, and that was off then a cul-de-sac of 55th Street north of L. And it was on just over 1 acre as well.
Right, right. And then I had one question regarding some of the initial analysis where you cite the comprehensive plan. I looked at page 7.456. And one of the statement had to do with developing neighborhoods. And I'm wondering, what is the definition of a developing neighborhood? Is it infill or is it not infill? And it looked like in the assumption of in the comprehensive plan, it looked like it was assumed to be not an infill developing neighborhood, but new. And the tag on the diagram on page 7.6 says that.
I think what we would look at is whether it's identified for urban density residential. Mm-hmm. So whether it's a greenfield site or an infill site, does it have that designation? And that's where we would look at densities such as this that are compatible with that designation.
Other questions? Do you have more, Sandra?
No.
Anybody else? Okay, thanks, George.
Thank you.
Ready for testimony from the applicant?
Good afternoon, Planning Commission members. Nate Burnett, Re-Engineering, 601 Old Cheney Road, Suite A. First of all, I just want to thank Public Works, planning staff, LES. We've worked even before conception of this plan with them on how we could fit the density that is desired, 6 units on this, working through infrastructure, through the sanitary easements. There's 3 sanitary easements on there, working with LES to get the proper utility easements. I just want to mention that they've been great to work with. So this project is for urban infill, 6, as George said, 6 family dwelling units, 2 single family and 2 single family attached. So we have 56th Street over here, Van Dorn to the south, and I would just like to point out on this aerial, you can see that there's a few of the lots that are abutting Ruth Street, but most of the lots within this neighborhood are in fact facing east-west. And so specific for our project, the question did come up regarding setbacks. Because we have the private drive, the overall lot will maintain its own setbacks. We have a front setback, side yard setbacks on both the east and west, and then the south side will have what would be the rear setback. Because of the private drive, as George mentioned, we do have a 22-foot garage setback from the sidewalk. So there's a 4-foot sidewalk on the west side of the 22-foot private drive. From that west side of the sidewalk, then we have the 22 feet so that a vehicle can park without encroaching into the sidewalk. We have that as well on the east side of the private drive. Within Outlaw A, which is the private drive, we also will have a new public sanitary sewer main for lots 4 and 3. The remaining lots abut existing sanitary lines. We've worked with Public Works on the private drive, and also in the staff report it showed a new public water main heading south from Ruth Street. We've been working with Dave Beiersdorf in the water department. It was actually their recommendation that we have non-abutting domestic lines, so we will not be putting in the new 6-inch water main, but instead we'll be working with Dave to get the non-abutting agreement for those domestic water service lines. So what that means is lots 1 and 4 have frontage to a water main on the north side of Ruth Street. So these 2 lots will just, like in any normal subdivision, bore across the street, tie into those lots. The remaining units, 2, 3, 5, and 6, domestic service lines would be tapped on the north side of Ruth Street and then come through the outlot to those units. Again, this project is a little unique in that we have a channel easement down here. We've got a 36-inch trunk sewer, we've got an 8-inch sewer, and a 6-inch sewer. So I think the proposed plan that we've worked through with planning is a really creative solution for this lot to get density and to be able to have infill. As the staff report says, this is for the 2040 future land use for urban design for land infill. We've, as George stated, the developer met with the neighbors on August 14th, and we've also gone before the Urban Design Committee last week. Here's some of the images that were shared with the Urban Design Committee. And while there wasn't a quorum there, all 3 members that were there did recommend to Planning Commission for approval of this project. Here's the single family. And with that, I'd open up for any questions.
Can you show me what, so I assume that those 2 pictures you just showed, those are going to be facing the internal street.
Correct.
North elevation.
What is going to be facing Ruth Street?
Just a minute. This would be the side elevation.
And are both units the same?
Yeah.
So there's that would mirror on the other side. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
So here's the north elevation, here's the south.
Could you, I don't know how to, I'm not excited about waiving that design standard, that neighborhood design standard. And I know that this body doesn't normally get into design standards, designing, but I'm really, I mean, I drove this area before I got here today because I wanted to see, because, let me back up. I know the neighborhood design standards, they're supposed to match what is already on the existing block face. So I drove around the neighborhood, and it's primarily brick ranches, or if they're not brick, they're still single-story houses. They might not have a huge porch on there, but they do have an entrance that is facing the street. And so when I'm looking at this, several options come to my mind, and I don't know, because I'm not an architect, how expensive and all that kind of stuff, but is there any way that you could, you know, like maybe wrap around the porch or put like a patio on that side that faces Ruth Street or something, so it just looks a little more inviting to the face of Ruth Street?
I'll save that question for the developer who will testify after me.
Okay.
Any other questions for Nate? I don't see any. Thanks, Nate.
Yep.
Actually, I would like to ask one more question, because I was trying to understand the water issue.
Okay.
So the NOD's raised an issue about, a concern about runoff. And they've, the city has said that they didn't think there was gonna be a lot more runoff, but the calculations of your own study showed a 45% increase, or 45% more runoff on a 2-year storm as opposed to a 100-year storm. And I'm just curious, I'm assuming we get more 2-year storms than 100-year storms, and what I didn't see in your report was how often do we get 2-year storms?
Well, every 2 years, come on.
That is not.
That is not true.
Oh, okay.
A 2-year storm over 24 hours is 3 inches, and so that's a pretty significant rainfall. Obviously, last week we would have had, a couple. I think one of those was over 3 inches in 24 hours. The remaining ones were, below that. So there's probably, once every 2 years. I mean, 3 inches in 24 hours is a lot, and a lot of times we're getting half-inch rainfalls, 3/4 inches, 1.5 inches. 3 inches is quite a bit. So
My concern actually is the amount of increased flow into the channel there, because I think that 2-year storms come more frequently than 2-year storms, and there is a difference in how much water is absorbed and how much is run off when things are paved. And so
Sure.
It's not that it's 6 units, it's that it's a lot more pavement. And I'm wondering what you intend to do once the developer walks away and they have the homeowners association, if the water actually begins to erode the channel and adds to floodplain issues, what's the recourse?
Well, I will note that. So on the south side, one of the things that we tried to do because of potential concerns for that is we were not directing runoff, say we weren't capturing it in an inlet and discharging it at a single point. So, the rear yards will all drain sheet flow. The private drive, which would drain obviously the drive, and then the fronts of the units will sheet flow. And so because we have such a large area down at the south, our private drive is 2%, and so it's not going to be just a single point discharge, which would lend itself to be more erodible, where we're going to have more sheet runoff, and then we'll also be maintaining most of the existing bank. As George stated, we're not going to be grading over an acre, so we're not getting into SWIP plan, we're not doing water quality, and so most of this bank will not be touched, and so that will remain in place. Obviously, we'll be working with the NRD at the end of where the pavement ends to put in some erosion control measures that are suitable, so that as that sheet flows down to the bank, that we're not causing any erosion there.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so there's additional testimony from the applicant? Is that what you were inferring? Okay. Let's continue then.
Russ Meyer, 321 Park Vista here in Lincoln. With an eye towards residential development and growing our city, we are proposing to develop this site at 5405 Roos into 6 new homes. Homes that offer what buyers are looking for in our current real estate market. We're planning to build 3-bedroom, 3-bath homes, approximately 1,500 square feet, or a little bit bigger than that. Unfinished basements and 3-car garages. This will provide much needed housing, as I mentioned. Currently, our housing market in Lincoln has 700 homes available to purchase in all price ranges. And our Lincoln local market should have about 1,500 homes at any one time to buy. So we are in need of more housing units to develop and to sell. We are aiming to build in the 275 to 325 price range. And currently in our Lincoln market, there's simply not enough housing availability to meet this demand in this price range. This development grows the tax base for our city from a single property that is currently valued at $172,000 to 6 single-family homes that are valued north of $1.8 million. Our team is keenly interested in and has experience in providing housing that does urban infill with suburban lots that have previously been underutilized and in need of renewal. We're also encouraged that these projects do not require major additional infrastructure that a new neighborhood on the edge of the city would need. On August 14th, we hosted our open house at Gear Library. The purpose was to introduce our plans, listen to neighborhood feedback, answer questions about what was happening to the land. Our development team had sent out 215 invitations to our neighbors within a quarter mile, fellow property owners, and invited the 3 overlapping neighborhood associations as well to attend the meeting. About 25 folks attended and asked really good questions. A couple of the things I wanted to address today were the designs of both from Roos Street. So this image here, if we're looking to the south, standing on Roos Street, this would be the house that would be on to the right-hand side of the view. And of course, here is the drive down the center of the property. The 2 existing trees that are there, we plan on keeping, both shading the house and providing the street tree view that we all want. From the left-hand side, so again, looking south down the private drive, this is the property on the left. You would have the street tree that is, of course, required by the city, and it's indicated there in a small street tree. Questions?
Could you point out those trees on the map, please, that you plan to keep?
Sure.
On the site, on the aerial? I don't know if you have that, but.
Got a site plan. Some scratches on it there. So here's Roos Street. And this is an existing tree, and then the city tree between the sidewalk and the street.
Okay. Thank you.
What do you think about my earlier comment about wrapping that porch around or putting something there?
Wasn't in the plan. We're trying to build a neighborhood within a neighborhood, and So it's the inward-facing neighborhood within neighborhood as an infill project.
Is there a way that you could accomplish the goal of having a neighborhood within a neighborhood, but also having the neighborhood within the neighborhood be integrated with the existing neighborhood as well? Could you do something for no extra money from an architectural detailing standpoint on those structures to at least acknowledge the street? Whether you would actually wrap the porch or do something else like that physically, but at least from a detailing standpoint, acknowledge the existing street and the adjacent existing neighborhoods. Is that possible? Could you have your architect look at that?
It's always possible.
I think it would be great if you could do that. I personally think that the architecture that you're building will help the neighborhood. I think architecture along a street is better than no architecture along a street, so that's a great move. But just from a detailing standpoint, you could make a huge jump and accomplish another really important goal in terms of context.
One of the things that we wanted to point out was the ways in which the different homes on the streets face each other in relation to 5405 Roos. The Victorian at 4331 faces its front door and its sidewalk face the back side of the church, or the side of the church. These two homes both have addresses on Roos Street that face south. 5400 directly across from us, it does face, the front door faces to the south, but not 54th
Right.
Street. And there's a 3-car garage that faces there. This home there does too.
What about the homes on the south side of Roos Street facing north? They face the street.
Perfect question. They do. The homes on the south side, this one faces Roos, of course. This one does not. It faces east. The front door is to the east.
Mhm.
These homes do face Roos Street, and these as well, but they face the back sides
Right.
of these houses. Face fronting, face fronting. This image here has a little bit about the density. I know that was a question that came up in the neighborhood meeting that we had. Looking at different densities, if we looked at other developments, recent developments within the last 3 years on Roos, we have a total square footage of 33,000 or so divided by the 4 properties, the 4 homes that are there. Comes to about 8,400 square feet per property. And if you take our 1.15 acres that we're looking to develop on, we come up with, of course, divide by 6, we have about 8,300 square feet per unit. So it's very similar densities with something that was done 3 years ago and what we're proposing.
When I was looking at the different properties and then reviewing my notes, it appeared that your architecture really responds well to the house to the east, the 2-story, versus, and that has the side entry and the porch and then the ramp. And so from a streetscape standpoint, it seemed to fit okay from that concept versus across the street with the 1-story homes with the front porches. But it did feel like you'd see balustrades and porches from the street view both directions, whether the door actually faced to the street or you saw a side view, because two-dimensionally, you hardly ever see a home. We always see it in perspective. So it did feel like you'd carry that nature or character down the street when we drove it.
Well, certainly seeing the existing trees staying.
Oh,
makes a
absolutely.
difference.
Yeah, that makes
Very
me
important to
happy.
our development to keep the existing trees as much as possible, especially the street front trees.
That makes a difference.
I want to press the issue though, because like I said, I think it's better to have the site developed than not developed. But I'm going to give an example that I know this commission, not all of you were on the commission at the time, that we approved that is now developed, and it's the northwest corner of 40th and Pioneers Boulevard. That's a very similar concept, neighborhood within a neighborhood. And again, it's better to have that lot developed than not developed. And I run by this every morning. But what's happened is that the facades that face both 40th and Pioneers, and then the other local street, which I think would be what, 39th, are all the side, not the entry facades, right? So what's happening now is those side and or backyards are being fenced. So there's another layer. That could happen here. There could be a fence that goes up at the property line, and it is not consistent with the big neighborhood, the overall context of the neighborhood. So the goal of neighborhood within a neighborhood there is being accomplished very well. I think all the units are sold. They're building more. But there is the larger issue of how does it fit at that spot in Lincoln. And it's important, and I'm not asking for a lot to be done here, just an action to acknowledge that somehow through an architectural detail or details. That's all I would like for you to look at.
Well, and I do appreciate, Russ, the attention to detail that I think I saw in some of the submittal information that you've given to us today. I think that the exterior of these homes will be covered in fiber cement board, is that correct?
Fiber cement is the
Thank you for
ideal.
I appreciate the opportunity to include the existing trees there. I think that's a nice addition to the existing neighborhood while also transitioning into the newer area. And that's not always an easy transition to make. Saving trees is a lot more difficult than people want to acknowledge. And thank you for doing that.
And
I appreciate it.
I should have said that. I totally agree with that, by the way.
Yeah, that does put a different perspective on it for me. And where I did just drive that, I agree. And I pulled up that picture again on the city website because I know that house to the east does orient, to the east. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to see like what made me think that wasn't so out of character as opposed to this. And I think these trees will really help. But I also think part of it is there's a window closer to the porch. And I don't know, I mean, is that garage right there? I don't think it is. No. So it must be living space.
So another part of the design, which is really important for our development group, is to provide the housing closest to Ruth Street and to hide the garages as much as possible. And so from the views that you would have traveling down Ruth Street, they would be a little bit hard to see. The garages would be harder to see. They're behind the front porches, and they're certainly at the backside of the house.
So I'm wondering, I mean, if you go back to that other picture where there's kind of that blank wall there, I mean, could we put a window in or something? I mean, or, some differentiation. I think to me that's what makes it look so long and not very inviting.
To me, I think we're getting really involved with the detail here.
I understand.
I really do. I think that this developer has gone to the point of satisfying as much as reasonably can be. I mean, if we were to stand in front of the private drive that's to be developed and did a 360-degree view, we would see houses oriented north, south, east, west. That's what's there today. I don't.
I'm very well aware of that, Tom, and I don't mean to be defensive, but I just drove that area, and honestly, this is the difference between a yes and a no vote for me, because this is violating neighborhood design standards, and that's why I'm on this board. So this is huge.
And you should vote no.
I mean, if the developer is not willing to work with the neighborhood design standards, then
you should vote no.
Then that's a deal for me, and so I'm trying to get that across to him.
I think one of the reasons why we had a solid wall there was to have at least a wall that was solid on the inside. So it was both a work between interior and exterior. We try to make all of those different things that we need, both inside the house and outside the house, fit all in one place.
Hi, sorry. Brent Robinson with Nebraska Home Sales, 6001 South 58th Street, Suite F in Lincoln. So just to address the wraparound porch, So with that sewer that runs through, we're on the setback, and a covered porch goes over the setback, and so we would have loved, that was actually one of the things we looked at originally, was how do we kind of make that, and that's one of the reasons why we, did a raised berm on the other side and tried to have high foliage there to try to do that. We're always willing to look if there's another window or whatever, we're willing to look at that, absolutely, because our goal was to make these appealing towards Roof Street as much as possible, and keeping the existing trees and putting that new tree and having that higher berm, which the picture doesn't, this picture right here doesn't depict very well, but that was our goal. So we're happy to look at that, but we can't have a roof go over that because of the setbacks of the sewer. So that's.
Sure, thank you for explaining
Sure.
that.
I want to commend you for doing the neighborhood event. I think that you went above and beyond what we see mostly, and so thank you for that. I love the trees. I love pocket neighborhoods, so, I think you're really striving and trying for this, and thank you.
Just one question about, we got the minutes from the Urban Design Committee, and they weren't able to do an actual official vote, but there wasn't much there in terms of input. Was that pretty much it? They heard what you wanted to do, and then they said okay, because there's none of these concerns are not reflected in urban design.
There wasn't a whole lot that they had to say.
They didn't have any concerns about the waiver.
They had questions, but no concerns.
Okay, thank you.
That's not
Well,
how I
I'm
read
sorry.
the minutes, but okay.
I shouldn't say no concerns. There was a lot of discussions, but at the end of they said to push forward with they recommended approval. So
Differently.
sorry, I shouldn't say there's no concerns, but there was a lot of questions, and we had good discussion. But at the end of discussion, it was recommended to move forward with approval.
Thank you.
Sorry, thanks.
I think one of the members did say one of the members did say they wanted something attractive facing Roost Street. So I think that I'm not the only one with this concern.
And there was a comment about porches being shallow. I am glad to see that the fences were wrought iron. So allowed, but wrought iron, so that they're permeable.
Mm-hmm.
Visually permeable. I mean, of course, air will flow through as well.
Transparent.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, other questions?
No.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have testimony in support of this application? Okay. Do we have testimony in opposition of this application? Come on up.
So I have copies of mine. I'll read it. My name is Karen Griffin. I live at 5337 Roost Street, Lincoln, Nebraska. My comments are focused on two aspects of the development that require waivers from the Planning Commission. I disagree with the recommended approval to waive subdivision ordinance 2613-140G to allow for lots without public street frontage, which you've all been talking about. We live in the townhouses 2 doors west of this proposed development, and frontage to the street was successfully accommodated. Frontage to the street is more in character with the neighborhood and should not be waived. Second, I disagree with the recommended approval to waive the subdivision and zoning ordinances that allow for 6 dwelling units instead of 5. The Roos Haven Community Unit Plan has proposed removing significant green space, including numerous trees on the property. Yes, some are saved, but others are lost. The property abuts Antelope Creek. And again, I look at the development that we live in. Our community unit maintained green space and existing trees. Our development did not require this waiver to increase the density, the dwelling density. And I note a quote from the 2040 Comprehensive Plan that encourages preservation or restoration of natural resources within and adjacent to the development. This proposal does neither. I thank you for the opportunity to comment on this proposed development. I would like to conclude with a statement that I am not opposed to this redevelopment. But I do think that the waivers are not necessary. I do not believe that the proposed plans are in character with the natural amenities of our neighborhood and the surrounding area. We live on Rue Street and along Antelope Creek because of the natural spaces that are habitat to a variety of wildlife, including bald eagles the other day, I have to mention, when I was riding my bike on the trail. We love the access to the parks and the trails. This development does not take advantage of those natural open spaces that made our community unit development so attractive to us. And as you saw in some of those illustrations, the facing sides, both to Roos and to Van Dorn, are walls with minimal windows. And that's all my comments today.
Is there a map of where you live?
I live in the new units to the west.
To the west, okay,
yes.
Thank you.
And so if I remember right, when I drove by, those do face Rue Street.
Yes.
But there's two, is it two or is it just one on Rue Street that's right adjacent?
Two on Rue Street and then two back.
Behind. Okay.
Did you attend the public meeting?
Yes, I did, and it was very nice that they accommodated that meeting so close to the neighborhood, and we had many of our questions answered, and also the planning department was very helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions? Thanks. Their testimony in opposition. Okay, come up.
Hi, I am Leanne Holmes, and I live at 5339 Rue Street, so the next neighbor over. So I am the neighbor that's immediately adjacent to this new development. And mainly, I just wanted to have a couple of clarifications. I mean, there were a couple of things that were discussed. In fact, those porches are 6 feet, not 8 feet in depth. I wanted to show you, this will be my view, this is my view from my backyard. I think for most people, when you have a house going next to you, the house is next to you, this will be in my backyard next to me, not next to my house, about 5 feet away. So there's not a lot of distance between the development and, there's only a 5-foot abutment, which isn't a lot. The picture down below it is the view that you'll have from the bike path. And again, we're talking about a very pretty area in Lincoln. This is the bike path in Antelope Creek. And I think all of us that are in this area are here because of the nature in the area. And so, I do hear that some of the trees are being maintained, and I do hope that that's the case. Although I know that sometimes when you begin building, you hear things like, oh, we tried, but it didn't quite happen. And I want you to know that there are more than 2 trees there. There are quite a number of mature trees, and there's a whole orchard of pear trees. And I know all of those are going. And so I feel like it's going to be quite a shame to see all of that go. Not for just me. Certainly I'll be sad to see this in my backyard, but from the bike path and from the perspective of anyone on the bike path or on Antelope Creek. Currently, as you saw in all the schematics, there's just a little house with 2 bedrooms and a 2-car garage. We're now talking about 18 bedrooms and 18-car garage, plus additional parking. This is a pretty small, quiet neighborhood, and so that is a lot of density. And I realize that that is important. We do need more housing, but I don't think $300,000 is affordable in anyone's mind. So when we're talking about affordable housing. I've also heard a lot of comparisons to our development compared to this development, because I am in one of the newer townhouses. Our development might be the same size, but there are 6 adults total in that development and about 4 cars. So, and a lot of green space. When I look at the schematics of this new development, there is not green space. It is, I don't think I need to put it back up, you've all seen it, but it's primarily pavement. And the terms they use are low maintenance, and that might be, but in my terms, it's no green space. And I'm not sure that that follows your comprehensive plan, the 2040 comprehensive plan. When we're thinking about infilling, I hear the words affordable and maintaining, as Karen said, green space. Again, like Karen, I'm not opposed to development. I would like to see something a little more reasonable, 4 units perhaps, and more green space preservation, particularly in this area. And something, I think that you guys have all touched on the aesthetics as well. Thanks.
One question. So by right, the applicant can already do 5.
Mm-hmm.
Would you be comfortable with 5? Or
I
do
would
you still
not
think
be comfortable with 5, but as you said, I can't say anything about 5. I think that, I mean, based on where I live and that there are 4, I think 4 seems about right. It allows for the forward facing, and it allows for people to take advantage of the natural view that's there. I think it would be hard to put 5 that could face north-south, because there's no reason to use that lot except for the view.
Thank you.
Other questions? Thanks.
It does. Oh,
We have a question.
wait a sec. I'm not sure it's for you. It raises I have a question about the 5-foot setback.
Okay, so that's.
I probably can't answer that.
We'll get back to that. Okay, any other testimony in opposition? And we'll go to staff questions, so you can ask about your 5-foot setback.
Yeah.
Staff questions, George?
I'm quickly going back to the conditions.
I have a question that's kind of
you go
along
ahead.
those lines, so I'm going to start while you're looking there. Because this is residential to residential, do we have any screening requirements, in between these 2 properties? I mean,
The only tree or landscaping requirements that I'm aware of would be the street trees. I would mention that with the outlot, which is over 12,000 square feet, that's not going to be developed, they will be providing over 20% green space, and this district has no minimum green space requirement.
so there's no requirement that they would have to screen that side lot in between, like the east and west sides?
No.
Okay.
If they ended up with a 5-foot setback on the side lot, was that waived? Is that a waiver they're asking? How did we get to there? And shame on me for not paying super close attention to the setback lines on the side.
Actually, there would be a 10-foot setback by default because there's a utility easement that would be along the west property line.
So it's 10 foot from the structure to the property line.
Correct, and then the adjoining property owner would have their additional setback
And
as
so
well.
and then they have their additional, which would be nothing less than 10 feet.
Nothing less than 5.
Nothing less than 5.
So we're talking about a minimum of 15 feet in between
feet.
properties,
Okay.
in between structures.
Structures. Okay.
Any other questions?
Nope.
Any other questions for staff? Yes?
Oh, I know.
I had one.
Okay, Tracy
But
first and then.
Oh,
someone.
no, go ahead, because I don't
Developer.
remember what it is.
Mine's for the developer, I'm sorry. I had a question.
No? Okay.
Good.
Thank you.
Thanks, George. Okay, we are ready for applicant rebuttal.
Couple things here, just kind of sketched in blue here what would be the open or green space. As George noted, there's 12,000 on the outlot. We have 10 foot on both the west and east. There's the sanitary main that runs down the property line. So we have a 10-foot sewer easement for that. Then on the east side, we have 10-foot LES easement or utility easement. We have the front setback set is about just over half an acre, and we're developing 1.15, so we're probably just north of 40% green space. So I think we're maintaining quite a bit for what could be developed on this lot. Going back to comment on density, with working with Christ Place, getting that additional land, this 1.15 can support the 6 dwelling units, which is the density calcs allow for 6 units for this 1.15 acres. So we're not asking for more density. We're just proposing what is allowed with some adjustments on the zoning.
Okay. did you have a question?
You know, that takes away my question.
I do have one other thing to say too. Just on the grading. As stated before, here's the end of our private drive, and the bank is down here, so we have at least, say, 20, and then as you get further to the east, you have sufficient area where it's before the bank. So the bank's here, our private drive is here, so we'll have a buffer there between where the sheet flow is coming down from the private drive before it goes to the bank. So I hope that also minimizes some of the concerns on erosion.
It's helpful, but I'll leave it to the NRD to make the final say.
Anything
Any other
else?
questions?
No. Okay, I don't see any. Thanks, Nate. No, wait, I guess we do.
I'm going to pick on Russ again.
Okay.
I didn't know if he was planning on coming up or not.
Can I pass these out?
Because I know you're a realtor.
Yeah.
If you had to guess, the houses north of this, what are they, what's their market prices look like right now?
Anywhere between 125 and 150, 160 is a guess off the cuff. The houses in the newer development, one door down, was sold for 225 to 245 a couple, 3 years ago.
And what target are you aiming for?
275 to 325.
So I'm not a real estate expert. How does it work? How successful is it when you put kind of different price points next to each other like this?
Excellent question. We know that a mixed neighborhood, mixed value and mixed
income?
Mixed income, yep, excuse me, thanks. Mixed income neighborhood works really well. There are other good organizations in Lincoln that are doing that type of work. NeighborWorks is one of them, where we have both low to moderate income buyers and market rate buyers right next door to each other. For the specific increases in prices and values, I think that's commensurate with the way the market is currently. In Lincoln, for a long time, we've had 2% increases over many, many years. In the last few years, we've seen 4% and 6% increases in value in just the last 2 or 3 years. So it may sound like a lot of money, but it's, again, commensurate with the cost to build new construction in Lincoln.
Would it be your educated guess that putting in a new development like this could potentially raise the property values of the other houses to the north and to the other neighborhood?
It very well could, but as you know, you've got each house is individual. Mm-hmm. Each house stands alone. And when you have appraisals, appraisers are looking for comparable properties in the general area, but not specifically your next door neighbor.
It also looked to me when I was driving through that maybe the houses in the neighborhood are maybe 1 to 2 bedrooms, maybe 3. Is that?
It's a mixed bag between 2 and 3 bedrooms, and all design styles. I think in our design meeting, we specifically talked about how there's no specific design style within this neighborhood. We have split levels, we have ranches, we have 2 stories, all different shapes on all different eras. The Victorian house next door, and there's another old farmhouse just up the block.
Yes.
60s and 70s, 80s, and now properties that were built in 2015 and 2016. So it's a typical Lincoln neighborhood, old and new, a mixed bag.
Mr. Meyer, you have a reputation in this town for working in infill development.
Correct.
Could you discuss some of the previous projects you may have worked on in some capacity, whatever that capacity may be, and how this redevelopment, this infill redevelopment would compare to those?
So this compares to some of the other projects that I've worked on at Antelope Square, 24 townhomes at 23rd and Q, which is a development that NeighborWorks has put together. a property that was for sale through the city of Lincoln as surplus property. And then lots were added to that through work that I completed to buy up almost an entire block's worth of property that faces Antelope Creek on Q Street at 22nd. And then another project was the half block of property that was occupied by Zion Church when it burned down 10 years ago at 9th and D. It sat empty for 8 years, and the way it had been zoned was it could have become anything. It could have become a gas station. It could have become lots of different options that the neighborhood did not want. I worked with NeighborWorks to help purchase that property and transform that half block into 7 new single-family homes for first-time home buyers. So this project at Roos is very much in the same vein of looking for projects that can improve neighborhoods and provide housing opportunities that increase the good things that are happening in Lincoln.
Very good. Other questions, comments? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I think we're ready to entertain a motion and discuss.
Move approval, Beckius.
Second, Harris.
Discussion?
I think this particular site has a lot of challenges to it. I think the developer has done a nice job trying to address those challenges while also creating housing stock that, while perhaps not affordable housing stock, is still attainable housing stock when we're talking about new construction in Lincoln today, especially if we're talking about the square footages that we're seeing here. I don't necessarily agree that it's a perfect fit for the neighborhood, but I think it's pretty darn close, and I'll be supporting the motion.
Others?
I agree with Tom on this, and on probably every point. I would have wanted the houses to look a little bit more like the houses in the neighborhood. I know it's a mixed bag from Victorian farmhouse to split level 60s, 70s. But I feel like it's a tidge jarring, but given the parameters that we have, I can support this.
I think I gave my closing earlier, but I'm supporting it too. I think it's a good fit, and I think they've done a nice job of pulling it together, so I'll be supporting.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, I just said that I'm losing my voice.
Good.
Just that I support it, so go ahead.
Yeah, I'll be supporting it as well. I think, you know, this application fulfills a lot of the goals of the comprehensive plan, probably most importantly infill. That is one of the most important aspects of vibrancy and keeping neighborhoods alive. And infill is sometimes challenging, and especially in cases like this where you have to work with easements and agencies, and I think an effort has been made to make the best of the situation, so I will be supporting it.
You say anything?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'll be supporting it also for some of the same reasons. Okay.
I've been fortunate enough to work with Russ on other projects, and I know that his heart is in the right place, and I know that he's trying to do what's best for the neighborhoods. And I understand that he is wanting to create this pocket neighborhood. But in the comp plan, we have one thing that we look at is connectivity. And I know that this site is kind of left out of that connectivity with the other part of the city because it's on that Antelope Valley, you know, that runoff there. I shouldn't say Antelope Valley. I don't know what that's called there. The drainage. So, you know, ideally we would have, you know, if this would develop as the blocks to the north did, you know, 54th Street and 55th Street would keep on coming through. But it's clear that that's not going to happen in this case. And I think that this is a a good plan, with the exception of I would really like to see something integrating it into the existing neighborhood. I think that connectivity is very important. So I am going to vote no on this just because I know what a challenge it was to get those neighborhood design standards in there. And I feel like I have to go on record and say those are very important and we can't waive those, because otherwise we get slip-ins and other kinds of bad housing, and that just leaves us open to that, and I can't promote that. But otherwise, I think this is going to be a good development. I'm clear it's going to pass, and I think it'll be great.
I'm going to vote for the motion. It checks, this application checks a lot of the boxes that I think are important. We are adding housing stock to our city, which is important. We are developing a developable vacant property, which is important. I think that the approach and the concept is reasonable from a design standpoint, but I do agree with Tracy that it would be great if there was an acknowledgement to Roos Street and the existing neighborhood somehow. Not asking for a lot here, and I know I have no leverage to make you do anything, but I do want to go on record in saying I think that is a miss here. I know that I have personally voted for developments like this in the past as a member of the Planning Commission, and they have not turned out in terms of a fit to the neighborhood, the existing neighborhood, as well as I would have liked. So I just want to make that statement for the record. I guess that is really a design standard issue, and I think that's a problem, but I'm going to vote for it, for this, because I think there's so many other good reasons to do it. So I think we're ready for the roll.
Before I call for the vote, we have the applicant submitted. Okay.
Yeah, we have an amendment here that I think we need to talk about, right?
Yes, there was a motion to amend that was submitted by the applicant that staff supports, and it just addresses 3 site-specific conditions. Site-specific condition 1.1.2, which pertains to deleting the words "remove the side setback" and identify the 10-foot easement in the outlot B, and then also 1.1.3, which is add requested easements to the satisfaction of LES instead of per LES 8/17/2019 comments. And then finally, the third one was to address 1.1.5 to submit corrections to the satisfaction of Public Works Watershed Management instead of per their 8/2018 comments.
So you made the motion, Tom? Are you good
I'll
with that
accept.
amendment? Okay, very good. Okay, and the second, who is the second?
I accept.
Good, okay,
the new motion.
okay.
All right.
Are we ready to vote? Let's vote.
Okay. Beckius?
Yes.
Finnegan?
Yes.
Harris?
Yes.
Joy?
Yes.
Washington?
Yes.
Core?
No.
Share.
Yes.
Motion carried 6-1.
This time, anyone wishing to speak on an item not on the agenda may do so. See none? We are adjourned.